Hey guys, good morning. Welcome back to the VintageSpeed Garage channel. Today we're going to be installing a limited slip differential in the V10 powered bump side. Reasons to install a limited slip is to try and get a little more power to the ground. The mighty V10 here with an open differential tends to one leg and spin one tire and not put all of the power to the ground. So in order to try and get as much of that torque as we can into forward momentum, we've got to get these tires to hook up, and I'm hoping that installing a limited slip here will help that problem. The limited slip I've got here is a typical 8.8 limited slip from a Ford Mustang application or a car application. The truck limited slips are a little bit different and a little bit larger in the clutch plates. This one, when I ordered it, was supposed to be the F-150 truck style limited slip. Unfortunately, I was sent a Mustang limited slip, and we're going to give it a shot and see how it works. The clutch plates are a little bit smaller. Clutch plates are a little bit smaller in the car style limited slip, but I think that's going to work just fine in our little lightweight F100 here. So the way a differential works is it splits power between both axle shafts so that both of your tires can turn in opposite directions and still drive forward under power. However, if either one of those tires loses traction for some reason, it'll just pretty much spin, and the opposite side won't be putting down any power at all to the ground. Limited slip helps that problem by adding some clutch plates in there that are spring-loaded and tensioned so that you can tune and adjust how much power is going through your side gears and out to your axle shafts. So I've taken apart the Trac Lok limited slip here that I've got that's going into the truck, and cleaned everything. I've got the clutch plates and the steels soaking in some ATF overnight just to kind of impregnate into those friction discs and help put everything together a little bit easier here. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble this and get this ready to go into the rear axle on the V10 bump side. One key thing to check before you pull the differential out of your rear axle is to make sure that the spline count on your limited slip is the same spline count as your axle shafts, otherwise you're not going to get very far with this. The Ford 8.8 rear axle has two different spline counts, either 28 or 31 spline. Most passenger cars had the 28 spline, and most of the truck applications and heavier duty applications had 31 spline axle shafts, although we have seen a Crown Vic rear axle that had 31 spline axle shafts in it, so there is a possibility that you could have a car with 31 spline axles like later model Mustangs did. And the splines are here in the side gears. The side gears will hold the end of the axle shaft in place with a C-clip that is retained on the inside of the carrier, and that's what keeps your axles from falling out. I'll show you that when we pull the old diff out, put the new one in. And the differential forces are then transmitted through your spider gears, which go in between the side gears and hold this whole mess together inside of the differential case or housing. These clutch fibers or clutch discs are wet clutches. They're meant to be run in gear oil, submerged, much like the clutch on most motorcycle clutches, and that helps keep the heat down as you know the clutches are doing their job and slipping against the steels in the differential. So each side gear holds 3 fiber clutch discs and 4 of the steel plates in between the clutch discs, as well as an end shim. So the shims are adjustable. You could tighten it up with shims if you wanted to add a little more preload into your diff. If it's slipping a little too much in the corners, you can add a shim and tighten that up so that it's a little firmer in the differential action. If you're drag racing, you might want to shim it tighter so that you're not so worried about turning corners and having it slip in the corners, but you want to get as much power down in a straight line as possible. You might tighten it up and shim it tighter. So the way I'm putting this clutch stack back into place isn't exactly the same as the way the factory put it together. I'm going to put it together the same way I would put together a motorcycle clutch or an automatic transmission clutch for that matter, and stack the steels and fiber discs or clutches evenly throughout the pack. The way the factory did it is after the first clutch fiber, clutch disc, they had 2 steel plates back to back, and I don't much like that configuration. It's probably just the same either way, but I think it's a little more progressive, a little more linear if you have clutches and steels evenly dispersed throughout the clutch pack. So that's how I'm going to do it. So first thing I'm going to put on is our shim plate. This particular shim has a little ding in it from somebody. It looks like maybe even a center punch mark, so we want to make sure that is not going to be facing our steel or clutch plate, so we don't get any galling or binding or worn metal. And if we put that on the gear here first, we should be fine. So then our first steel plate, and this one, you know, they have a smooth side and a coarse side, so I'm going to put the coarse side down against the shim to hold that in place, and then stack our fibers and steels on top. Okay, so now we have the clutches assembled onto the side gears, like so. And you can drop that whole assembly into the differential carrier. And you can feel the tension that those clutch plates add to the side gears, and that's how you tune the differential action and the amount of hookup that you get out of a differential by changing the shim packs or the clutch plates themselves, putting some thicker ones in there. It's totally tunable like any other clutch pack would be. Okay, and there we have both of our side gears here in the differential. Now what's going to hold those in place are our spider gears, and the spiders just basically sit on top and below the 2 side gears and keep them located, and the spiders are held in place with our centering pin. The centering pin goes through the carrier and holds both of those gears in position so they can't wallow around in there. Now the spider gears have a shim, okay, that sits there. It's kind of a friction bearing that sits against a machine surface on the top of the spider gear, and I need to put a little dab of grease on each one of these just to hold them in place while I push the pin through and all that nonsense inside the differential or inside the rear axle, so that none of this stuff falls apart on me. Okay, so now's the tricky part of getting the spider gears into position. The spiders have to be 180 degrees opposite of each other, and the easiest way to install these, you have to put them both in at the same time. If you can't put one in and then the other. So what you want to do is put your first spider gear into position here on one side of the differential. Put the opposite spider gear 180 degrees out from the first one without your side gear falling out on you. Okay, and with both spiders opposite of each other, you want to rotate the whole assembly and rotate those spider gears into their position inside the carrier. So you turn them opposite directions so that they'll roll up into position, so that your cross pin can go through them and hold everything together. Next thing we're going to put in is our spring, and the spring keeps tension on the side gears and clutch packs so that they don't chatter. It's just some people call it a sissy spring. It's just to kind of preload the side gears so that you don't get a bunch of noise and vibration happening inside the differential. It's really all it's used for. Okay, so once you get your spring started into the gears, then you can pretty much just push it in, but getting it initially in between those 2 side gears is a challenge, as you saw. Okay, Okay, so now with our spring installed here between the two side gears, you want to check and make sure that your cross pin will go through. There we go. Now we've got our spring installed, cross pins loosely put in for now. The cross pin's got to come out in order to get the axle shafts C-clips onto the end of the axle shafts once we install the carrier. But this carrier is loaded up, ready to go. Got to swap over the ring gear from the old open differential carrier, and hopefully we won't have any pinion depth problems, and I just have to set backlash. And once you have your C-clips, axle shafts installed, cross pins back in place, you want to put your retaining bolt into the carrier to hold that cross pin from backing out. So that's how you put one of these Trac Loks together. I'm going to go ahead and climb under there, pull the old differential out, the old open diff out of the rear axle, get the ring gear pulled off of it, clean that up, clean out all those bolt holes, make sure there's no Loctite or any other gunk inside any of the bolt holes in the ring gear. Put the ring gear into place onto the limited slip, Loctite all my bolts in place, torque them evenly, get the new ring gear, or get the old ring gear onto this carrier, slam it back in there, and check our backlash between our ring and pinion gears. Okay guys, I've got the ring gear all cleaned up here, the bolts all cleaned up, ready for some fresh Loctite and get installed on our limited slip differential here. One last thing to check before you get too far, this could be a deal breaker on your installation, is check the carrier height where the ring gear bolts. If you put your two carriers together, you should have within a couple thousandths of each other the same height for the ring gear mounting flange here on the carrier. In this case, that's where I'm at. I'm probably 5 thousandths different height on the limited slip versus the open diff carrier that came out of it. That's acceptable. I'm going to bolt the ring gear on here. I'll have to shim the back spacing, or shim the backlash a little bit on this carrier, but that should be no problem getting this installed here in our 8.8. Alright, and that diff's ready to go in. I'm going to go ahead and lube these bearings a little bit with some grease, just for initial break-in, just when I first start turning. I don't want them to be dry, so I'm going to hit them with a little bit of grease. The grease will break down in the gear oil and won't be a problem. Okay guys, so with everything cleaned up, ready to reinstall, we can slam this thing in with the stock shims and check your backlash. If it goes in loose with the stock shims, you're going to have to shim it to tighten it up. Always keep a hand on that diff. No matter how hard you had to tap it to get it in there, it will fall out on you. So when I took these caps off, I left the top bolt in place, so I knew that was the up, and I kept them separated side to side so that I put the right cap back on the proper side. About 9 thousandths, a little looser than I'd like, but yeah, 9, maybe 10 thou. So I would kind of like that a little tighter, but at this point, since I am considering re-gearing, I'm just going to call that good enough. 7 to 10 is where you want to be. 10's on the loose side, but I think that'll work okay. Might be a little noisier than I would like. It's actually looking more like 8 to 9. So we'll call that good for now. Okay, so with our backlash acceptable, I've got to torque these down, and I'm just going to throw the breaker bar back on them and pull the hell out of it. I think that'll be all right, because that's what it took to get them loose, so it should be all right. And we'll continue with the assembly here. Get these axle shafts slapped into place. Okay, so with our bearing caps cranked down, we're good to go to shove the axle shafts in here, get our C-clips back in place, and start reassembling this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the locking pin out of our cross shaft here, which I just put this in temporarily to kind of hold everything in place while I put that limited slip in the axle housing. Didn't want the spiders falling out or something else while I was trying to get it in there. Alright. So there's our pin. And there goes our cross shaft. Now we can rotate this thing down where we can see, put our axles and C-clips in here in between our sissy spring, and get this thing buttoned up. Okay, so with our axle shafts protruding, I can slip these C-clips back into place. Now we can, now with the C-clips in, you've got to pop the axles back out, like so, and rotate it back down and install our cross shaft and retaining pin. And we've got a completed limited slip installation. So here's our cross pin. You've got to remember where the retaining pin goes in here. So make sure you line that up with the hole in the cross shaft. And then find that hole with your pin. And if you pushed it too far in there like I did, you can reach up in the back and just kind of walk it back a little bit. There we go. Alright. And the last thing I would recommend doing is put just a drop of Loctite on these threads so that that retaining pin doesn't walk out on you. And just a drop will do you on that Loctite. You do not want to glue this thing back in because it's easy to strip out if you were to overdo it on the Loctite. That should be all you need. Alright, so now we're ready. We've got our axle shafts in place here. We can put the brakes back together, clean the diff cover, get that bolted back on and sealed on with a little bit of RTV. Get the cover back in place, fill it with gear oil, and go do some burnouts. Well guys, that pretty much wraps it up on the limited slip installation on the V10 bump side. Installation went pretty well, other than trying to film around all the mechanical work, getting that old differential out and getting the new limited slip differential installed. But I gotta say, the results were well worth it. It's raining tonight, so I can't get on the truck very hard, but first gear is always kind of useless in this truck. But I gotta say that having that extra grip in second going into third feels really good. You know, I can't get past more than half throttle even right now, but it's going to be a kick in the ass when the asphalt's dry around here and I can get it out and see how it handles in the corners. I did notice that the inside tire was slipping a little bit more than usual turning corners here, but that's probably because of the wet and maybe because this limited slip is a little tighter than I might like. But we'll see how it is in the dry, and hopefully everything's going to be dialed in and good. I filled the rear axle with limited slip rated gear oil. You saw me pumping a bunch of that. I pumped for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get that thing filled. But we're filled, we're not leaking, so we're all good there. And I really can't wait to get this thing out on the road here. Maybe tomorrow it'll dry out enough I can get it out there and actually use some of the upper RPM range of this awesome V10 motor in the V10 bump side here. So hopefully that video helps some of you guys out that want to put a limited slip in your Ford 8.8 rear axle. It's a pretty straightforward installation. It's not very difficult to do. It takes a couple hours. It took me more than a couple hours just because of all the videoing and having to move cameras around and wait for batteries to charge and that kind of thing. But for you guys, it should only take a couple of hours, and hopefully that video step by step kind of shows you what you're in for. It's not very difficult. Make sure you check that your open diff carrier and your limited slip carrier are the same height for mounting the ring gear, because that's a big no-go. If they're off by, you know, more than 1/8 of an inch, you definitely will need some shims, and it may not be possible to get your pinion depth correct with that big of a disparity between the two limited slip carriers. But in my case, because this limited slip came out of the same generation axle as the open diff, it was pretty much a bolt-in operation and was really a no-brainer for me. So this week I also installed the wideband O2 sensor, added a bung into the X-pipe in my 2.5-inch exhaust coming from the headers back to the Flowmasters here on the V10, as well as added the analog 0 to 5 volt output as an input on the stock EEC5 PCM that's in my truck, so that I can data log the O2 the O2 readings from the wideband and the AFRs that are being recorded. And we're going to start doing some upper RPM tuning. We haven't tuned any of the RPM band above 3,000 on the truck yet, so from 3 to 6 things are going to get really exciting, and I think hopefully we can crack open quite a few more ponies out of this awesome Triton V10 that's in the truck. So anyway guys, for me here at VintageSpeed Garage, that's going to do it. That's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you like this kind of content, please click like and subscribe down at the bottom here, and we'll be bringing you more modular content, more Ford 8.8 content, I'm sure, as things start flying apart here from all of the massive torque in this motor, and more of the OBS content that you guys are looking for too. So subscribe, stick with us. We'll catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching.